I looked at it, we said, how are we going to explain this to people? Because it didn't make sense. So Tom and I built this wheel, and for the bearing, with the Timken bearing on it, so that they could understand it. It makes a little better understanding. Next to it over here, I brought a brake shoe that came toward my car when I was sitting at a railroad crossing. So I thought, you know what, this is an educational thing. So people should realize that whenever they go to a railroad crossing and a train's going by at 50 miles an hour, they should stay back about 3 car lengths, because if that comes off, which it did, and it hits the side of their car, they're not going to be happy. Okay. Next is rail with torpedoes. And torpedoes are used when we were in the dark zone. Okay. And so if my train broke down, this is when we had cabooses, we'd blow a long and 3 short, and the brake flagman would go back a mile, and he would put 2 of those and a flare at the track, and then he could walk almost back to the train, because the next train that came by and hit those, they exploded, and that told you that you needed to stop your train immediately, and then go for at least a mile at 15 or less. Okay, that's an REA cart that we actually got at a garage sale one time, and that's a 10-ton jack. Now they use that for a couple things. Like the photo, they're lifting up a corner of a box car that was that needed to be repaired, but down at the bottom is a little foot, and they can slide that underneath the rail, and they can jack the rail up. So if they want to balance, if they want to make it balanced. Over here on this wall, we have building plates. These would go on the boiler of a locomotive, and it's just like your identification. It tells, that's the engine number, when it was built, who built it, and so that way they knew where the engine came from. Builder's plates. They still make builder's plates for all the diesel electric locomotives. They're on there. These bridges are hand built by Ken Bilstein. Ken built these when he was living in Vermont. They're absolutely incredible. And what was really wild, we had a drawing almost identical of the bridge that this is. We found it in our archives. The paper there is what they call a dispatcher's train sheet from 1907. And you can see every engineer's name is on there, the conductor's name's on there. When the train left, at every point, the dispatcher would go and write all that information down, and that's how the railroad kept track of their trains in 1907. The lanterns are from different railroads. This one is from Norfolk Western. It is blue, and that tells the engineer, if that's on the back or front of a train, that he cannot couple to it, because somebody is either working under the car, on the car, or above the car. Somewhere there's an employee on that. The red, if you can see the 2 red lanterns, they are conductor's lanterns, and they're from nickel plate. And this one, the conductor painted red, because as the sun came up, he was concerned that the engineer could not see a signal, so he painted the lantern red. All right. This down here, train from 1910. Okay, a Lionel train from 1920s. These are date nails. A date nail would be put onto a bridge somewhere or on the end of railroad ties. And so if you see it says 29, that's the year that it was installed onto the railroad, went into service in 1929. 23, 55, so we've got several of those. And we've got just a lot of real artwork. Down below, that yellow signal is like a factory railroad crossing. They just put it up, and that way you know that there could be a train coming. It's your responsibility to watch it, look for it. The next one is a caboose lantern from 1920s. And these two over here are what they call turnout switch lanterns. So they would be on the top. And as you bring your train in, if a lot of times the lead, which is the main track, they would all be green. If it was yellow or red, then the engineer knew that he was going into that track. So he better, if he wasn't supposed to, he better get control of his train. Down here is a wind-up. We don't know. I haven't been able to discover when that was created, but that's a wind-up, and we actually have the key to it. So that's, and then over there is one of the first battery-operated trains. This is an approach signal, and the approach signal tells the engineer that when he goes by that he better be ready to stop his train at the next signal, because he could go, there could be something on the other side of that signal for him. All right, so that's an important. And if you're going more than medium speed, which is half of the maximum speed, so if you're doing 60, you immediately have to slow your train down to 30. All right. Down this way, over here, sorry. The way railroads were built, the government gave them their land, and then they went and they sold stock. So these are actual retired stock certificates. And then after they had their money, they had architects draw their tracks out for them. As you can see, this is from Norfolk Western in 1979. Those are the tracks that are going through Lorraine. Over here, the next case, I'm sorry, get my hand out of your way. Okay. The next case has my pay slip when I went from Peru, Indiana to Bellevue. Then I had my train orders, and that tells exactly what I'm going to do, where I'm going to do it with my train as far as speed restrictions. And of course, everybody had to have their book of rules and their safety book of rules. Over here, this is a consist. Now this consist tells us the number of the car, what position it is in the train, what it is carrying, where it came from, and where it's going to, and how much it weighed. Now the purpose of that is if you have a derailment, you can hand this to a fire department or a police department, and they can know whether there's dangerous materials in that car. And up above, that's a switch lock, which is on every main turnout, and those are switch keys. Every engineer or conductor has a key for his railroad that he runs on the division. This stuff over here is just basically from the nickel plate. The nickel plate went out of business in 1964 when Norfolk Western took them over. So all this stuff became available. They were throwing it out. And then down here, this is actually Bellevue Yards back in about 1966. And of course, On the right-hand side, there's no tracks, but there are today. There's another set of 40 tracks in there. Okay. Those pins down there are all the railroads that now make up Norfolk Southern. Down the hallway, we've got some railroad art, and so we put this up for to let people know that the railroad business is very lonely. You're out there in the middle of the night, in bad weather, while everybody else is snug in their bed. On the right-hand side are caboose lanterns from New York Central, and this one is from Norfolk Western. As you go down here, we will go straight down. You see the red signal. Now the red signal tells us that's your stop and stay. And you want your stop and stay because what happens if you go past that signal, you're going to run into the back end of that train. So this tells you you don't move. On this side, this is Chris Adelia is building this. This is the history, part of the history of the Scioto Valley Model Railroad. That was our first G-scale layout. What happened to that, somebody planted ivy in there, and the ivy took over, and we lost our train. We had to come in.
You got a little piece of candy while you're waiting there?
We had to.
A couple suckers there too.
Thank you. Okay, so they had to come in with a backhoe and tear it out, the whole thing. These are the charter members that we had. It was started, Jay Early was just retired. This is one of the trains from the Civil War representation. We put that up there because 300,000 Ohioans went to fight in the Civil War, and over 30,000 did not come back home. So we wanted to honor both sides, North and South, for the sacrifice that they made. This cabinet here, these are on the bottom shelf, these are all manuals that the railroad, when they bought engines, they would give us a manual. So it was just like a new car owner manual that we all get. And so this way we could get in, and no matter what engine we got, if there's something that we needed to know about, we could go through those books and find it. So we had lockers, and when you got your engine numbers, you knew what they were, whether they were General Electric, Baldwin, Fairbank, Morse, whatever they were. You knew it. And so sometimes you grab the manuals. I didn't know that much about Fairbanks Morse, so I always took the manuals with me. This yellow is a radio acoustic coupler. When radios first came out and they put them on engines in the 1970s, we couldn't talk to Fort Wayne dispatcher. So you would have to take your headset and put it to that black rubber ring and squeeze it, and it would make like a squeal sound, and then that made it possible for you to connect to the Fort Wayne dispatcher. Of course, within a year, they did away with them because the new radios that came out had it built in to them. So, there's a nickel plate. This was all trains had a first aid kit. And so that was a nickel plate first aid kit. And beside that is what they call switch list, and the conductor would write down all the numbers of the cars so he knew what train he had to make up. And there might be 150 cars in the yards, and he only needed 30 of them, so you'd have to switch those out. This is our well, to honor the Appalachian area, because of all the coal jobs and all the railroad jobs that were created in Bluefield and Portsmouth and all the way up to Columbus. So this is our way to honor them for all their hard work. Over here, railroad crossing safety. We have a Ford Cobra GT that's been hit by a local, and of course, then the highway patrol handles those kind of accidents. And of course, this was the caboose that I built to represent the train that we needed in case you went past the stop and stay signal. Okay? Over here, this is our Christmas city. We still have to add lights to it, but it's to represent the urban areas of our country and how people got around. And so we created a stop, what they call a point-to-point display, so that people can see that trolleys were very important in the history of our country. And up on top of Lazarus is a special guy because he has his own transportation. Okay? All right. This is to honor World War II. The railroads were extremely important during the war. So on the right, we have a brakeman's uniform from the 1940s from New York Central. It's the actual thing. Now the pin that's on his lapel there is his union pin for the trainmen. And of course, World War II, this was Pam Fligel's father's uniform from World War II. So we wanted to do that, and then of course we've got the pictures of the passenger trains that they would have used, and the only picture that's out of date is the one with the kitchen. When we were riding the Rocky Mountaineer, the door opened and I took their picture. There were 5 people in that little kitchen working. You want to open the doors?
Show him that picture of lights up, Jerry.
Yeah, well, here. Okay, yeah, I'll do that real quick. This is an actual telephone from a shanty. When the shanties would be all along the line, if you needed to talk to the dispatcher, that's the way you would do it. You'd call them up. These are just photographs that we had in some artwork of the railroad industry. And of course, like everything, there's collector's pins. Those are all different railroad collector's pins. Now this piece is very, very rare. This came from Mr. Webb's family. He got promoted to a chief agent, and when he did, the railroads all sent him passes, and so he could ride their trains. And then if you look at the dates, all those passes are from 1899, 1900. So they're 119, 120 years old. That was a great donation that we received. Okay, this stuff over here, this is when he got to be a chief agent. Fairs would also send him. He would get complimentary passes to things. Railroads, when you rode their passenger trains, they would give you decks of cards. And of course, they liked to do that with kids because they didn't want the kids running up and down the passenger cars in the aisles. So they would give them this, and those are from the Chessie system. Over here to the left, those are insulators that they use on electric wire and telegraph wires, which they don't use anymore. Down below, if you are an employee and you don't get injured, then the railroad would give you a hat for your safety record. So you either got a hat or you would get a nice light coat. Okay. Over here now you're getting into the timetables. Timetables have to be carried by every employee that's working on the railroad, and we had a donation, and those are from all over the country in all different time periods. This is an RPO. An RPO stands for Rail Post Office, and the goal of the Rail Post Office is, of course, they got their mail. They got bags of mail as they went along the line, and they would sort it. So here's a letter for Bucyrus, Ohio. So you've got to find where Bucyrus is at. It's down there in that lower corner. And from about this distance, you had to throw it into the box so that you could sort the mail. Now, they were much more proficient than what I am, but they're fun to do.